Perfect. Oh, thank you very much. Oh, you.
So,
Hi.
hi Linda,
Hi, Eileen.
how you doing?
Can hear. Why you can hear? Speaker.
How's your phone? Welcome to All Tech Man Things.
Okay, good evening, good evening, good evening.
Good evening.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Let's just start recording here. 1 second. It's too dark. Okay, I think we are good. Just waiting for a couple people to get on. Okay, how are we feeling? Good evening.
Good
You
evening.
all ready for some turkey?
No,
Nope. Okay.
salmon. Salmon.
Salmon. Salmon's good too? Okay. It's not a mitzvah. Don't worry. It's not a mitzvah. So you're okay. Don't be violating any laws. Salmon is good. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'apel mi'eved v'ori.
But pie has to be a mitzvah.
What's that?
Pie has to be a mitzvah.
Yeah.
Which one again?
Pie.
Hi.
Pie. Up. Yep. We all love pie. As long as you save some for Shabbos. You eat it on Shabbos, you get a mitzvah. That's the one time that leftovers is a mitzvah, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So welcome to lesson 4 of Secrets of the Bible. We're already in lesson 4. Wow. Okay. Time flies here. So today's lesson, if you have your book, great. Otherwise, I'll be sharing my screen throughout the lesson, on and off. Today's lesson is entitled Joseph and His Brothers. And we're going to delve deeper into the story, one of the favorite stories in the Torah of Joseph and his brothers. It's actually one of the longest stories in the Torah. The Torah spends a lot of time talking about the saga between Joseph and his 10 brothers. He had 11 brothers, but Benjamin wasn't really involved in all this. So as we did in the previous lessons and previous classes, we're going to look at this story in the Torah. Then we are going to raise questions, objections, problems, try to poke holes in the story. We're going to introduce a mystical, Kabbalistic idea, which will answer the questions and bring it all back together. And then, of course, we apply it to our day-to-day lives. As we've done in the past lessons, it's fascinating how Chassidus, specifically how the Rebbe, would take these every Shabbat, every Saturday, he would give a Farbrengen for many, many hours, and the same style of taking a verse or a story in the Torah, ripping it apart, so to speak, putting it back together based on a Hasidic mystical idea. So we're ready for a journey. We'll learn how Joseph and the multicolored coat is more than a story about civil rivalry. It's more than a coat, but it's lifelong lessons, and it's a story of Jewish history for thousands of years. So as we did in the past, instead of reading the entire reading, we're going to have the PowerPoint read it for us. But for reference, you see in your book, if you have a book, it's on page 102. And they're long readings because it is a long story, even though it's shortened here. So we split the story into 3 different videos, 3 different parts. So here we go. Introducing the story of Joseph and his brothers. Okay, everyone see it? Share the sound. Okay. Sit back, relax.
Joseph was 17 years old, shepherding with his brothers in the flocks. And Joseph brought bad word of them to their father. Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons, as he was a child of old age to him, and he made him a striped coat. His brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, and they hated him. And they were not able to speak peaceably with him. Joseph dreamed a dream and told his brothers, "Here we were bundling sheaves in the middle of the field, and here my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And here your sheaves surrounded, and they bowed to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Shall you then reign over us? or will you rule over us?" And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. He again dreamed another dream and related it to his brothers, and he said, "Here, I have dreamed another dream, and behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing to me." His brothers envied him, but his father guarded the matter.
Things come to a head when, one day, Jacob sends Joseph to check on his brothers, who are out shepherding the flocks in the countryside.
They saw him from afar, and when he had yet to come near to them, they schemed against him to put him to death. And they said to one another, "Here comes the dreamer. Now let us go and kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we will say, 'An evil beast has devoured him,' and we shall see what will become of his dreams."
Reuben, the eldest of the brothers, dissuades the others from committing outright murder, suggesting that, instead, they throw him into one of the pits out there in the wilderness.
When Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped Joseph of his coat, the striped coat that was on him, and they took him and threw him into the pit. They sat down to eat bread, and they lifted their eyes, and they saw, behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead. And Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, but our hand shall not be upon him, as he is our brother, our flesh." His brothers listened, and they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph to Egypt. They took Joseph's coat, and they slaughtered a hairy goat, and they dipped the coat in the blood. They sent the striped coat to their father, and they said, "We found this. Please recognize. Is it your son's coat or not?" He recognized it and said, "My son's coat. An evil beast has devoured him. Torn. Joseph is torn." And he mourned his son many days.
Okay, so what do we have here so far? We have
A great soap opera.
so far it looks like a soap opera, right? Very good. So basically, Yaakov shows the preference for Yosef over his other children. Yosef, in turn, speaks negatively of his brothers to his father, and of course arouses their jealousy because of the dreams. The brothers plot to kill Yosef, and then end up selling him into slavery, and then misleading their father into believing that Yosef was killed by a wild animal. That's part one of the story. There are a lot of questions here. Actually, there's a tremendous amount of questions here. We're not going to focus on. Anybody just want to poke a question or two at the first part of the story? Maybe there's something bothering us?
Yes. Why did Joseph tell his brothers about the dreams? He probably knew that they didn't like him. And he must have known that by telling these dreams, he would just get their enmity even more. Why didn't he just keep it to himself?
Keep it quiet, right. What's wrong with Yosef? Why is he instigating his brothers and starting, fights? And, you had a dream, keep the dream to yourself. I don't tell anybody my dreams. I told everybody my dream. Just kidding. But who do you want? Why do you have to tell? Especially if it's going to make them feel bad. They knew, and he knew what he meant by those dreams, that he would rule over them. Why you tell them? So it's a dream. Even if he felt it's important dream, why the need to tell them? Very good. Anything else? We'll touch on that.
Why did Jacob give him that special coat? I mean, a father is supposed to love all his sons equally. Yet we know throughout Genesis that isn't necessarily true.
Very good.
But why would he give the coat which he knew would lead to more enmity?
Right. why does he show such professional, this different treatment to Joseph over the brothers, knowing that it's going to arouse their animosity towards him?
Yeah, why did Yaakov send Joseph to really, in essence, spy on his brothers, see what they were up to?
Right. And why is it seems like Yaakov and Joseph, they're both guilty here. They're both guilty of it. And not only Yaakov and Joseph, the brothers are also guilty. Everyone has issues here. It's a real family, you know, you got to see a family therapy.
It's a dysfunctional family.
That's what it would seem like. If you just read the story, which is why it makes, like you say, she's a greater soap opera, because it seems like it's a 21st century dysfunctional family. But of course, it's the Torah. And the Torah is telling us the story.
Came out okay.
What's that?
The Ishmaelites came out okay. They were good people.
They're fine. We don't hear any bad stories about them, right? But we have issues. We have problems, family issues. So, and there's no mother-in-law involved here. It's just brothers and sisters. So let's go on. We're going to go on to the second part of the story, part 2, which is when they reconcile Joseph and his brothers. And then we'll connect, we'll ask questions on the entire story because it's really one answer that connects everything together, which also is based on what we learned last week. So here we go. I'm going to start the, oops, I didn't share my screen. Sorry. Share screen. Okay. So, okay. Do you hear it?
Yes.
Oh, you can. There you go. I apologize. I think this is the right one.
The next segment we will read is from Genesis, chapter 45, and it occurs 22 years after the selling of Joseph. In the interim, this is what happened. Joseph was taken to Egypt and sold to Potiphar, a high-ranking officer in Pharaoh's court. Joseph was immensely successful in everything that he did, and he was put in charge of all his master's affairs. Potiphar's wife lusted after the beautiful and charismatic young slave, and she tried to seduce him. When Joseph rejected her advances, Potiphar's wife had him thrown into prison. After many years in prison, Joseph gained his freedom when he successfully interpreted Pharaoh's dreams, which predicted 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. Pharaoh appointed Joseph viceroy of Egypt, and Joseph's successful planning saved the entire region from starvation. The famine also engulfed the land of Israel, and Joseph's brothers came to Egypt to purchase grain. Joseph recognized them, but they did not recognize him. Joseph accused his brothers of being spies. Taking one of the brothers as a hostage, he forced them to bring their youngest brother, Benjamin, to Egypt. At first, Jacob refused to send Benjamin to Egypt, but the famine was in full force, and soon their food ran out. Finally, Judah persuaded Jacob by vowing to assume personal responsibility for Benjamin's safety. When the brothers came to Egypt for the second time, Joseph framed Benjamin by planting his silver goblet in Benjamin's sack. He arrested the brothers and declared that Benjamin will remain in Egypt as his slave. Judah approaches Joseph to plead for Benjamin's release, offering himself as a slave in Benjamin's place. This is what happens next.
Joseph was no longer able to constrain himself, and he called, "Remove every man from my presence." and no man stood with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. He put his voice to weeping, and Egypt heard, and the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? His brothers could not answer him, as they were bewildered before him. And Joseph said to his brothers, And now do not be distressed, and it should not upset you that you sold me here. For as a source of livelihood, God has sent me before you. It is not you who sent me here, but God. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, So said your son Joseph, God has placed me master to all of Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay.
And that is how Jacob and his 12 sons, who would become the 12 tribes of Israel, ended up in Egypt.
Okay, so to recap the reconciliation between Joseph and his brothers, basically Joseph rises from slavery to become the viceroy of Egypt and saves the entire region from the famine. And he tests his brothers by threatening to take Benjamin as a slave, and finally he reveals his identity to them. And when he does so, he reassures them that he's okay, he doesn't bear any grudges, and everything is ordained by God. So now I want to present two big questions. There are many questions. There are dozens of questions on this story that can be answered with this Kabbalistic idea, but let's focus on two main questions, two primary issues. So number one, I want to focus on, I think Steve mentioned this originally, the idea of the brothers. The brothers' actions in plotting to kill Joseph and selling him into slavery. That's number one we'll focus on. What was going on there? And number two, Joseph's behavior when the brothers come down to Egypt to get food. So they seem, Steve, that you mentioned before, the Yaakov and Joseph's actions, and include the brothers' actions. Their behavior seems extremely puzzling. It's very puzzling, very troubling, until we uncover the story within the story, the deeper meaning behind these events. So let's begin with the first question. Very simple question. How could the brothers do such a thing? To plot to kill their own brother? To sell, the youngest brother, Benjamin was the youngest, but to sell a younger brother into slavery? How could something like that happen? Now, of course, you'll say, well, we're not bothered by that. We have feuding brothers in the Torah, all over the Torah, right? Cain killed Abel, right? Esau plotted to kill Jacob, and so on. But this is different, because those cases are generally understood as being the classical good brother, bad brother model, right? Cain and Abel, good brother, bad brother. Yaakov and Esau, good brother, bad brother. But this is not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about good brother, bad brother with the story of Joseph and his brothers. Take a look at text number 3, if you have the book, on page 107. Otherwise, I'll read it. Here we go. This is taken from the Shnei Luchos Abris, or Bishai Horowitz, known as the Shalah HaKodesh. He says, before explaining how the story of the selling of Yosef and all that happened with him is the basis for the kingdom of David and Mashiach, we must address the great difficulties with the story. First of all, a most general difficulty. The greatness of the sons of Jacob, the progenitors of the 12 tribes of Israel, is well known. Certainly they were greater than the supernal angels, as they represent the mystical 12 configurations of the divine name Havaya. How then could the mind grasp the idea that these exalted individuals would join together to commit the most severe sin of all the sins in the world, namely the sin of murder? We're not talking about Esau here. We're not talking about Cain. We're talking about the fathers of the tribes. When it comes to Abraham and Isaac, so Abraham had one good son and one not such a good son, right? Isaac and Ishmael. Isaac had 2 sons, one good son and one not so good son, right? Yaakov and Esau. But when it comes to Yaakov, we say mitoshe shlema. his bed was complete. That's the literal translation, meaning all his children were righteous. 1 second, if all his children are righteous, if we're calling Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, etc. righteous, how could they have plotted to kill, to commit murder, or human trafficking to sell Joseph as a slave? It's a good question. Right? So if we say, well, okay, the brothers were, there's human beings and they went astray, but we're not talking about just regular human beings. We're talking about tzaddikim, righteous people. There must be something beneath the surface that is the cause of why they thought selling Yosef or even killing Yosef may be justified. Question number 2. Another very interesting and very puzzling, idea in the story, and that is the second part of the story when they reconcile, and that's Yosef's strange behavior after his brothers appeared to him in Egypt, and he puts them, I guess, say in English, through the ringer, right? So many trials and tribulations before finally revealing his identity to them. So if you look at it, remember the story, you can also look at it inside, but remember, Yosef seems to be tormenting his brothers as revenge for what they did to him. He accuses them of being spies. He throws them into prison. He releases them, but keeps one as hostage. He forces them to go down and bring Benjamin to Egypt, knowing full well how difficult it's going to be to convince Jacob to allow that to happen. And then he frames Benjamin and threatens him to keep him as a slave. It seems like some sadistic scheme to make his brothers suffer for what they did to him.
I'd like to add a third.
What's
I'd
that?
like to add a third question.
Yeah.
Joseph was the ruler of Egypt. The commandment, honor your mother and your father. You're telling me for all these years, he was not worried about his father, that he couldn't have sent a delegation to Canaan to find out how his father was.
Right.
And he didn't do this immediately. Only after he plotted with against the brothers did he finally ask about Jacob. I find that is also very puzzling.
Correct. Another question, very good, very question. He could have sent, maybe a tweet or something, an Instagram, something, right? Or at least send some messengers and say, hey, you should know that your son Joseph is alive. At least let him send regards, a postcard, something. Why is he there in Egypt? He has the power, but he still doesn't reach out to his father. Very good question. We're going to address that too. This question about Joseph antagonizing his brother and really putting them through the ringer, you think, okay, so based on what they did to him, it makes sense. But then when we examine the story more closely, the theory doesn't hold water. Because you read the dramatic scene that reveals that comes afterwards, and we find that when he reveals himself to his brothers, and his brothers are taken aback and they're the shame or remorse, what does Joseph tell them? It's not you who sent me here, but God.
Yeah.
Right? He goes so far to tell them that don't be distressed, don't be upset. God sent me here to feed you. Don't worry, it's all part of the divine plan. When Joseph reveals himself to his brothers, there seems to be not an iota of anger or ill will in Joseph towards his brothers. He is comforting them. So unless we say that Joseph experienced a sudden 180-degree change in his feelings towards his brothers just like in a moment, it seems blatantly inconsistent with Joseph's actions just a couple moments earlier. So Joseph puts them through the ringer and really makes them suffer, and then says, I'm Joseph, I have no hard feelings, everything's okay. So why put them through the ringer? Why make them suffer? All right, we throw in the mix Dr. Barron's question, Steve's question about why doesn't Joseph reach out? What's his issue? So before we get to the mystical explanation and this great idea, I think it's fascinating. Before we get to that, I want to just spend a couple of minutes discussing different answers given by the sages, by the Talmud, throughout history, of what exactly is happening here. We'll go one level, an answer deeper. You know, we are told there's Shivan Panim LaTorah, there are 70 faces to the Torah. There are many different explanations to everything as long as it follows the guide to the Torah. So we'll learn a few explanations now, and then we'll delve into the Chassidus, into the secrets of the Bible. So the sages and commentaries offer a number of explanations, but I want to start off with an answer given by the Talmud, okay? Talmud Shabbos. The Talmud Shabbos tells us a little introduction that, the blame for all this sibling rivalry between Joseph and his brothers, some of the blame has to be put on Yaakov, on Jacob, and their father. Right? After all, it was Yaakov's treatment of Joseph that contributed to the brothers' hatred and animosity towards him. Let's take a look at text number 4. Talmud Shabbos. A person should never discriminate between his children. Look what happened on account of 2 seahs weight of fine spun wool that Jacob bestowed upon Joseph more than his other children, provoking their jealousy and causing their forefathers to end up in Egypt. So the Talmud is telling us that you have more than one child, you have to treat all your children equally. It's not enough to love all the children, because Jacob loved all his children. But he treated one child better than the other children. It says here 2 seahs, I guess that's how much the coat was weighed, 2 seahs of fine wool. And because of that small extra treatment to Joseph, this whole story snowballed, and they ended up almost killing him. Right? So therefore, the Talmud says, a very important lesson, don't treat one child different or better than other children. Okay, that's what the Talmud says. But still, nevertheless, the brothers' reaction to this provocation is quite extreme. Even though they were upset, perhaps, that Yaakov treated Joseph better, but to take it to the extreme that they wanted to kill him, and we can all relate. Sometimes, some of us have experienced a parent who treated one child different than another child. Does that mean that it's grounds for murdering that child? Imagine a child comes to court and says, well, my defense is, my parents treated him better, so I killed him. It won't hold water in court. So if we look at Jacob's children as tzaddikim, as righteous people, that's not an excuse. This jealousy is not an excuse to kill them. So let me take it a step further. And there's another explanation. Rabbi Ovadia ben Jacob, Seforno, he's known simply as the Seforno, he explains that the brothers believed that they were acting in self-defense. By killing or selling Joseph, they were acting in self-defense. Take a look at text 5. I'll read it inside. They saw Joseph as one who was plotting to destroy them physically or spiritually or both together. And the Torah states, one who is coming to kill you, make haste to kill him first. Right?
Where does the Torah say that? It says here, they put Talmud Sanhedrin 7.2a in parentheses, but there's no biblical citation, no Torah citation.
Right. So the question is, what is the term Torah referring to? When we refer to the Torah, it's not just the 5 books of Moses. The Torah is the entire oral tradition, written Torah. It's all called the Torah. The Talmud learns from a verse in the Torah that if somebody is coming to kill you, you should stand up and kill them first. Not only somebody is killing you, but if you see A about to kill B, you have an obligation to stop A, even if it means killing him. Okay?
Right, so there's 2 meanings to the Torah. The Torah, the 5 books of Moses, and also the compendium of all Jewish knowledge.
Right, yeah.
Okay. 2 meanings.
Yeah. So the question is, what do you mean they're acting in self-defense? How is Joseph threatening the brothers? So for this, we'd look at text 6. Here we go. Text 6, page 110. When they saw that of all his children, Jacob loved only Joseph, they thought that what will happen to them will be the same as what happened to Ishmael and the children of Keturah vis-a-vis Isaac, and to Esau vis-a-vis Jacob. They believed that for as long as Joseph was alive, they would have no portion in the God of Israel, and their descendants would be excluded from the blessing given to Abraham and Isaac, to be a God to you and to your descendants after you. This belief was confirmed to them by the fact that they saw that until now only one of the children of each of the patriarchs merited the blessing. So let's understand the Seforno and the Akedah, these two commentaries, what they're saying. So we have to look at the previous 3 generations. Okay, who was the first Jew? Abraham, right? Abraham entered into a covenant with God. God promised Abraham that his descendants would become God's treasured people. Right? They'd be given the Holy Land and have an eternal inheritance and serve as a source of blessing for all mankind. As it says, those who bless the children of Abraham will be blessed. But, among Abraham's children, only Isaac was chosen to carry the legacy of Abraham. The others, who were the other of Abraham's children? Ishmael, the oldest, and Abraham had another 6 children with his other wife, Keturah. They were all left out, right? So out of all Abraham's children, only one that blessing was transmitted only to one, only to Isaac. The same thing happened a generation later with Isaac's 2 children, right? Isaac has 2 children, Jacob and Esav. Jacob was given the blessing of Abraham, while Esav was excluded from the covenant. Now, when the brothers saw Yaakov's treatment of Yosef, they saw that Yosef was bringing negative reports of their behavior to their father, they feared that this process of elimination would be applied to Yaakov's children as well. That what would happen? Only Yosef will be chosen to be part of the special covenant with God, and they would be excluded. Like Ishmael was excluded, like Esau was excluded. So for the brothers, this prospect was, I say, worse than death. Right? Even though Yosef didn't threaten their lives in the physical sense, but they viewed him as a threat to their very spiritual existence. They were fighting for their very lives, for their spiritual lives, to be the progeny of the Jewish people, the tribes. And they felt justified to take such extreme measures to defend themselves. So this is what the Seforno and Akedah explain, why they took such drastic measures to get rid of Yosef, because they felt if Yosef is around, then the blessing of Abraham will go to Isaac, to Jacob, to Yosef, Yosef's children, and they'd be left out. They saw it happen. They saw it happen the previous generations.
Is there another explanation? Because the 12 tribes came from 4 different women: Leah and Rebecca, and then Zilpah and
so it's Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, and Zilpah. Yeah.
Right. Now, the ones who would probably be favored, and I presume they knew this, they must have known that their father favored Rebecca. So the children of Rebecca,
Rachel,
would probably feel that they're the ones who have the upper hand, and the other one should feel guilty. All right. Now, who were the 2? I forget who were the 2 of Rebecca. Rachel's children were who? They were
Joseph and Benjamin.
And okay, so there that would prove it, because all right, you see, but
yeah, you're right. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to the rift between Rachel and Leah, and Rachel's children and Leah's children, what they represent, and we'll get really deep into it Kabbalistically and see how it all makes sense. It fits seamlessly. Before we do that, just one more explanation that what the brothers were afraid of, the reason why they wanted to get rid of Joseph, was more than just sibling rivalry, and even more than just they felt threatened, but it was actually they were following a Jewish law. Take a look at text 7, and this is by the Shalach HaKodesh. We mentioned him earlier. He writes, Keser Malchus, the crown of sovereignty was granted to Judah. However, were it not to have been preceded by the kingship of Joseph in Egypt, the kingship of Judah would never have materialized, as the people of Israel would not have become a nation, God forbid, for Joseph is the channel. First had to be the kingdom of Joseph and then Judah. But Joseph's brothers failed to understand this. Rather, they thought that Joseph was seeking the sovereignty permanently and exclusively for himself and his descendants. They therefore judged him by the law of the Torah, concluding that he is deserving of death, as one who is contesting the sovereignty of the house of David. For one who contests the sovereignty of the house of David, it is as if they contested the divine presence. So what's going on here? The brothers knew that Judah would end up being the king. Kingship would come from Judah, all the way till Mashiach. And now they're hearing that Joseph wants to be the ruler over the brothers. He wants to be the king. He says, you'll all bow down to me. Both of his dreams, basically the point of the dreams were that they'll bow down to him. And there is a law that if you are a merida b'malchus, if you, high treason against the kingdom of David, what's the punishment? It's a capital punishment. So they've judged him to be guilty of the crime of high treason that is punishable by death. Okay? So based on these explanations of the Seforno, the Akedah, the Shalah, we can sort of appreciate that while the brothers made a mistake in their judgment in Yosef, in their own minds, they believed they were justified in their actions. Whether they felt that they wouldn't have the blessings of Abraham and Isaac, or whether they felt that they were, defending the kingship of Israel, of God, they felt they were justified. However, we want to get to the soul of the story. We want to get to the root of the problem, the root of the issue. What issue did Judah and Reuven have with Joseph, Joseph with them, Jacob? How does Jacob come into the story? And it'll fit so beautifully with what we learned last week. It's sort of a continuation, and we'll see how it continues throughout Jewish history. Okay, so here we go. Okay, we're going to watch the video of another one section. Basically, to understand the deeper basis for Yaakov's his treatment to Yosef and the brothers' jealousy, we have to go back and study the formation of Yaakov's family with his marriage to Leah and Rachel. As Dr. Barron mentioned, this whole rift began with Joseph being a child of Rachel, and Judah, Reuben, the rest being children of Leah. So if you recall from last week's lesson, after the stolen blessings, Yitzchak sent Yaakov to Haran to take a wife from the daughters of Laban. Now we'll see in the narrative what happens after Yaakov comes to Haran. We're going to learn here to actually watch the story of Yaakov marrying his wives. It's very important to get the details here, because every detail in the story has a message, a lesson. It's a connection.
The next segment we will read is from Genesis, chapter 45.
Okay, we have to somehow get this. There we go. Let's try. Let's try this. Current slide.
Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. The eyes of Leah were tender, and Rachel was of beautiful form and beautiful appearance. Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, "I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter." Laban said, "Better I give her to you than I give her to another man. Stay with me." Jacob worked for Rachel 7 years, and they were in his eyes as a few days in his love for her. And Jacob said to Laban, "Bring here my wife, as my days are fulfilled, and I will come to her." Laban gathered all the people of the place and made a feast. It was in the evening, and he took his daughter Leah and brought her in to him, and he came to her. It was in the morning, and behold, she is Leah. And he said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Have I not served with you for Rachel? Why have you deceived me?" And Laban said, "It is not so done in our place to give the younger before the firstborn."
Laban, however, agrees to allow Jacob to marry Rachel as well, in exchange for another 7 years of labor.
He came also to Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah, and he worked with him yet another 7 years.
And that is how Jacob ended up marrying both Leah and Rachel. Leah proceeded to have 4 children, one right after the other: Reuben, Simon, Levi, and Judah, while Rachel remained childless. Determined to participate in the creation of the people of Israel, Rachel asked Jacob to marry her maidservant Bilhah and have children with her. That union produced Dan and Naphtali. Not to be outdone, Leah had Jacob marry her maidservant Zilpah, which produced 2 more children, Gad and Asher. Then Leah had another 3 children of her own, 2 sons and a daughter, Issachar, Zebulun, and Dinah. Finally, Rachel's prayers were answered, and she conceived a child. Joseph was born. 8 years later, Rachel had a second son, but she tragically died in childbirth. The boy was named Benjamin.
Okay. This is the story of Yaakov marrying the wives, actually this week's Torah portion. And now we understand, on a simple level, you can better understand Yaakov's treatment of Yosef. You see, Yosef was the firstborn of Rachel, the only wife that Yaakov really wanted in the first place, and born after many years of not having children. In Yaakov's eyes, Joseph will always be his true firstborn, regardless of the fact that, he had 10 older sons, because he comes from Rachel. Rachel is his true love, his first love. So therefore, when Yosef reported the dreams that predicted that he would become the leader, inwardly it says that Jacob guarded the matter. He hoped for its realization. Okay? This also explains why Yaakov was so afraid for the safety of Rachel's other son, Benjamin, why he was so reluctant to let him join his brothers in the trip to Egypt, especially after, Rachel has passed away already, Joseph disappeared, and now the only remnant of Rachel is Benjamin. He doesn't want him to go. And finally, we can also appreciate the feelings of jealousy that the brothers had towards Joseph, specifically, particularly the children of Leah, right? And their animosity towards Joseph. After all, their mother, Leah, was Yaakov's first wife, the mother of the majority of the children, and still, Yaakov persisted in his preference for Rachel's children. So this was, this planted a seed for the rift between Rachel's firstborn, Yosef, and the children of Leah, under the leadership of Yehuda. Judah was the leader. Even after Yosef reconciled with his brothers, as we'll see later in the lesson, this divide didn't end. It continues to reappear in various forms throughout Jewish history. This conflict, the conflict specifically between Joseph and Judah. Today we don't have it as much because we don't know who the children of Joseph and Judah are, but we do have it spiritually, as we'll soon see, as we'll explain what Joseph represents and what Judah represents. Because in truth, this whole story is a crazy story. I mean, the whole birth of the Jewish people, the 12 tribes of Israel, all come about by the means of a dirty trick that Laban played on Jacob in substituting Leah for Rachel on his wedding night. You know, what's going on here? So in order to understand this idea, we have to go back further in the story of Jacob's life. Back to last week, the stolen blessings. Right? Remember the story last week, how Jacob stole the blessings that were meant to go to Esau? So you have the question of discussion here in the book on page 114. What are the parallels between the incident of the stolen blessings and the bridal bait and switch that Laban perpetrated against Jacob? Can you see any parallels between the two stories of Jacob Esau and Laban's Rachel Leah?
I think one. Let's see. The birthright was taken away from Ishmael, right, and given, and then this looks like the marriage was substituted with some sort of trickery too. It seems like both stories have little trickery in it.
Exactly. Very good. Let's take a look. All right. So we have here, I think there's a slide about it. Right, Jacob to Esau manipulates him into selling firstborn rights and steals his blessing. Right? Laban to Jacob, what does he say? It's not so done to give the younger before the firstborn. You know what Laban's telling Jacob? He's telling Jacob, he's sort of, as we say in Yiddish, yishtechik him. He's saying, you changed the firstborn, you're the younger one, and you became the firstborn, right? You did this trickery. We don't do that here, right? Here, Leah is the oldest. Leah's going to marry first, right? So he's sort of giving it to Jacob. So, but in both ways, the younger was switched for the older. Number two, Jacob said to Isaac, is this you, my son, Esau? And what does Jacob say? I am. Right? He says, I am. Here, Jacob says to Leah, was I not calling you Rachel and you were answering me? And let's take a look at text 9, page 114. We'll explain this. All that night, it means the night of the wedding of Jacob to Leah, Jacob was calling to her, Rachel. I guess there was no lighting. And she responded in kind. She said, yes, that's me. Then in the morning, she was Leah. Said Jacob to her, Deceiveress, the daughter of deceiver, was I not calling you Rachel and you were not answering me? Said Leah to him, every teacher has his pupils. When your father was calling you Esau, didn't you not answer him the same way? Okay. So we have another parallel here. Jacob says, I am, when Isaac calls him Esau, and Leah deceives Jacob by saying, here, yeah, when Jacob calls her Rachel. Right? And finally, Laban too, Laban seems well aware of this parallel. When Jacob confronts him, what does Laban reply? Text 10, page 115. Laban was taunting Jacob by saying to him, it is not so done in our place. Laban was implying, in your place, the younger child is made into the firstborn, as you acted when you appropriated Esau's birthright. But in our place, the firstborn's right won't be taken from the elder sister and given to the younger. Right? And years later, Jacob will be tricked by his own children. Right? What do they bring him after they sell Joseph? They take his coat, they dip it into
goat's blood.
Right, and it says hairy goat's blood. Why does it say hairy? Who cares if the goat is hairy or not? Right? That's
a good one. I don't know.
There's a reason for that, because the Torah is going back to the story of Jacob and Esau. Esau is specifically described as a hairy. And the only way for Jacob to get the blessing is to put hair all over him, goat's hair. Remember, goat's hair? And what did they dip the coat into to fool Jacob? Hairy goat's blood. right? So Jacob to Isaac, the skins of the goat kids she dressed upon his hands. And here too, Joseph's brother to Jacob, they slaughtered a hairy goat and dipped it in blood.
So it's more trickery.
Exactly. But we see what's going on here with Jacob and Laban, Jacob and Joseph, Jacob and his children is exactly parallel to what happened with Jacob and his father Isaac. In every sense of the way that he tricked his father, now he is being tricked the same way. Right?
Like what
Rabbi, was this God's way of doing payback
that's what I'm going to say. What comes around goes
for the
around.
deception of Jacob? Because I was wondering why Laban just couldn't be upfront with him, why he had to go through deception, but going through, how Jacob had behaved before, it would seem somewhat appropriate, I guess.
Right. You see, they seem to flow. It seems like God is getting him back. Right?
Yeah, it looks like what comes around goes around.
You think what goes around comes around. But there's definitely something deeper going on here. It's not just because, number one, what Jacob did to get the blessings was okay. It was right. He listened to his mother, and the blessings were supposed to go through Jacob. It's not a bad thing. But we see that what happens to Jacob, what Jacob does to his father, comes back to happen to him. And we see that in sort of three ways. Number one, Jacob deceives his father and gets the blessings. Laban deceives Jacob into marrying Leah, in addition to Rachel, and then the brother selling Joseph into slavery and deceiving Jacob with the blood-soaked coat, right? So now the question we'll ask is, what is the connection between the stolen blessings and Jacob's divided family? Right? Why did the fact that Jacob tricked Yitzchak and Esau, I guess, to obtain the blessing, the dew of the heaven and the fat of the land, why does that mean that Yaakov had to be tricked into marrying Leah? It's, you could say that God's getting him back, but there must be something deeper to that. Why does one warrant the other? So to answer this question, this is the meat of the lesson. This is the really juicy part of today's lesson, the Kabbalistic part of the lesson. Okay? And earlier we read regarding Leah and Rachel, and go into the psyche and the spiritual psyche of Rachel and Leah. How does the Torah describe Rachel and Leah?
They're rivals. They're sisters, but they're rivals.
Well, right. But before even we know about Leah and Rachel, the relationship between each other, it tells us that Leah, the eyes of Leah were tender, were red, right? And Rachel was a beautiful form and beautiful appearance, right? That's what the Torah says. What does that mean? Who cares how they looked? The Torah is not shallow. Jacob loved Leah, Rachel, because she was prettier? Doesn't sound right, right? So look at the Talmud text 12, and it'll explain to us. On a deeper level, this wasn't just, text 12, yeah. Leah heard people talking. Rebekah has 2 sons, and Laban has 2 daughters. The elder will marry the elder, and the younger will marry the younger. She would sit at the crossroads and inquire, how does the elder son conduct himself? She was asking about Esau. And they said, he's a wicked man, a highway robber. How does the younger one conduct himself? A wholesome man dwelling in tents. So she wept until her eyelashes fell out. So why does the Torah tell us that Leah's eyes were red, swollen? She was crying. Why was she crying?
Because her future betrothed was a no good.
Right.
No good Nick.
Right? Because she felt that Isaac has 2 children and their family. So she's the older one. She's going to marry Esau, and Rachel is going to marry Yaakov. And she was sad about it. Because if you look in Chassidus, we'll find that she wasn't wrong. In the original scheme of things, Leah was Esau's soulmate, and Rachel was the soulmate of Jacob. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just people talking, and it wasn't just about standing by the Kool-Aid, the water cooler, and talking to people. This was really the way it was supposed to be, right? And we're going to learn the mystical reason and the mystical depth of it in text 13. There's a lot to unpack in text 13. This is the reading from the Rebbe, Likutei Sichos, but I'm going to explain it. So let's first read it in English, and then we'll explain it and see the beautiful sort of how everything is weaved together. The essential difference between the two groups within the tribes of Israel is that the primary focus of the children of Leah is the service of Teshuvah, and the focus of Rachel's children, which Joseph and Benjamin, is the service of tzaddikim, the righteous. This has its source in their mothers. Leah is connected with the service of masters of return, and Rachel is connected with the service of the perfectly righteous. This is the meaning of the verse, Rachel was of beautiful form and beautiful appearance. Rachel indicates the service of the perfectly righteous, of beautiful form and beautiful appearance without blemish. Regarding Jacob, it is said, Jacob loved Rachel, because as far as Jacob himself is concerned, his primary task in life is the service of the perfectly righteous. As it says, Jacob was a wholesome man, a dweller of tents. His achievements are in the inside, within the realm of holiness, rather than in venturing out to elevate the outside to holiness. This was a deeper meaning of what the sages relate, that people were saying, Rebekah has 2 sons and Laban has 2 daughters. The elder will marry the elder and the younger will marry the younger. Leah's life mission, which is the service of master of return, indicates that her task is to turn back Esau to goodness, not to Rachel, whose mission is a service of the perfectly righteous. Okay, let's try to unpack this. Okay, let's begin with the first idea here in the text. Sorry. Yeah. So the first idea of this text is that the life mission of the children of Leah and her children, is that of what we call teshuvah. Okay, we'll explain that in a moment. The life mission of the children of Rachel is a service of a tzaddik. Okay, now every person has their own unique mission in life, but in a general sense, Hasidic teaching discusses there are 2 general paths in the service of God: the path of a tzaddik and the path of teshuvah. Okay, and we'll talk about it a little later in the lesson. Just a brief description of these 2 paths in life. What is a tzaddik? You ever heard the word tzaddik?
Yes.
Yes.
A tzaddik deals with holy and spiritual things. A tzaddik doesn't bother with materialism, with evil, with coarse things. A tzaddik is just simply focused on God and godliness and spirituality. Okay? Like Yaakov, the Torah describes Yaakov as a tzaddik. He's a dweller of tents. What's a tent? He remains inside spirituality, in the tent of learning. Okay? Like Rachel, the tzaddik is of beautiful form and beautiful appearance, right? Never compromising their wholesomeness, their perfection. Okay? They have a disciplined spiritual life. That's a tzaddik. How about a Baal Tshuva, a master of return? A master of return, a Baal Tshuva, is one who ventures into the material world, engages in the materialism, in the imperfection of the world, in the coarseness of the world. And like the original Esau, now Esau, remember, we learned last week, before Esau became corrupt, Esau was a man of the field, a hunter in a positive sense. This is the person whose life mission is to navigate the hunting, right? To go out into the world and transform the animalism of the world, the material world, and make it holy in a God place. Okay, that's the difference in short between the service of a tzaddik and the service of a Baal Tshuva. So now, listen to this, we'll better understand the connection between Yaakov tricking his father into giving him Esau's blessing and Laban tricking Yaakov into marrying Leah. Okay, so let's do a little recap what we learned in last week's lesson. This will be important here. So in last week's lesson, we discussed that originally, who did Isaac want to give the blessing to? The blessing of materialism? To Esau, right? He wanted to give that blessing to Esau and the blessing of Abraham to Jacob. He wants Esau to transform the material world. That's why he wanted to give him that blessing of materialism. And Jacob should get the spiritual blessing because he's about spiritual perfection. Now, Rebekah understood that Esau became corrupted by materialism and he wouldn't be able to transform it. right? And therefore Jacob had to get both blessings, the blessing of materialism and the blessing of spirituality, of Abraham, because he's the only one that can elevate the material world. Okay, so from that moment on, right, from that moment on that Jacob got the blessing of materialism, he now had to shift roles. Originally, he was supposed to be spiritual, stay in the tent, study Torah, just be a tzaddik. Now that he got the blessing of materialism, he had to have a paradigm shift. Now he has to deal with the world. Now he has to elevate the world. Now he has to do tshuva too. Okay? Originally, Jacob was very reluctant. Jacob didn't want to assume that responsibility he didn't want that blessing. And he told his mother that. He says, what's going to happen? My father will recognize that I'm not Esau. He's going to curse. He didn't want it. Even after he obtained the blessing, the material blessing, because his mother told him to, he still desired only Rachel. He wanted Rachel. Because what does Rachel represent?
Study.
Beautiful, it's tzaddik, right? The spiritual tzaddik's path in life. The beautiful form, beautiful appearance. When he saw these two girls, Rachel and Leah, he says, Rachel, you're for me. Tzaddik, I'm a tzaddik, you're a tzaddik. We're a match made in heaven. He didn't want Leah because Leah is tshuva, right? He still wasn't used to, I guess, to his role that his father gave him through his mother, that he has to also deal with the world. So therefore, the first deception, the deception of Jacob getting the blessing of Esau, had to be followed by a further deception. This time, Jacob had to be deceived. He had to be tricked into marrying Leah because he didn't want to marry Leah. He wanted to stay in the tent. He wanted to stay with Rachel, be a tzaddik. He had to marry Leah. Since he tricked his father into getting Esau's blessing, he had to get Esau's match too, his soulmate too. He had to deal with the world. He had to connect to Leah too, to the Al Tshuva.
No.
But even though he had to be tricked in it and marry Leah, his first love remained Rachel, because at the core, he was a tzaddik. His service, his natural service was that of spiritual perfection. That was his first calling. And therefore, his favoritism was Rachel and those who came from Rachel. Joseph and Benjamin, who were also tzaddikim. Actually, the only person in the Torah to be called a tzaddik is Joseph. Joseph is known as Yosef HaTzaddik, right? Because Joseph comes from his mother Rachel, who is by nature a perfect, right? It's a perfect and beautiful inside and out the tzaddik, okay? And that's why the jealousy now becomes between the brothers. Now, based on the spiritual makeup of Jacob, we understand why he loves Rachel, right? Because his service originally was that of a tzaddik. Rachel represents a tzaddik. Why does he have to be deceived into marrying Leah? Because he got those blessings through deception, and now he has to deal with the material world. Therefore, he has to marry Leah, which also comes through deception. Leah, which represents teshuvah, dealing with the materialism of the world. Okay, so now we're ready to answer the second big question that we asked originally in the class. And that is Joseph's curious behavior towards his brothers. Okay, listen to this. This is fascinating. Remember, if the question was that if Joseph harbored no animosity towards his brothers, why put them through such trials and tribulations? Why put them through the ringer? Why just not reveal his identity? But when we understand the entire story in the context of this children of Leah versus the children of Rachel, everything becomes clear. Let me explain. I'll start that by text 14. Text 14, this is a text from Maimonides, from the Rambam, the Mishnah Torah, and he talks about what is teshuvah, what is this idea of repentance? What consists full teshuvah, repentance? The answer is when a person is presented with the same sin they transgressed and has the opportunity to again transgress, yet refrains from doing so. For example, a person who engaged in forbidden relations with the woman and is subsequently alone with her, and his love for her is just as strong, and his physical prowess had not diminished, and he is in the same surroundings as he was when he sinned. Yet he refrains from transgressing. This is a person who has done a full teshuvah. So the Rambam says it's easy to say, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done it. That's a level of teshuvah, of repentance. But what is the real teshuvah? If you have an opportunity to do that same sin again, in the same circumstances, and this time you don't do it, that shows that you're a transformed person. Okay? How does it apply here? So remember, earlier, Joseph overheard his brothers expressing remorse for their cruelty towards him. But before he can reveal himself and reconcile with them, he has to bring them to a full state of repentance, like Maimonides says. How he's doing it for his brothers. He wants them, if he reveals himself to them, they'll say, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so they repented to a certain level. But how does he get them to the greatest level of repentance? And that is as follows. You see, when Judah approached Joseph to plead Benjamin's release, the brothers were in the exact same position they were 22 years earlier when they plotted against Joseph. Let's try to think about this for a minute. Right? Now, we can imagine when after the brothers sold Joseph, how frustrated they were, right? In their minds, they were justified with what they did, right? Like we said before, different reasons, they were justified, right? In their eyes, Leah was a true wife of Jacob, right? So, but what happens? After they sell Joseph, things don't get better. First of all, Jacob refuses to reconcile himself with Joseph's loss. He keeps on mourning. He retreats even further from them. Not only that, but now he transfers his love to Rachel's remaining son, Benjamin. For 22 years, he refuses to allow Benjamin out of his sight, out of fear that the same fate may happen. He's so overprotective of Benjamin. So what they did by selling Joseph didn't help anything. Now, the brothers stand in the Egyptian viceroy's palace with Rachel's second child, Benjamin right here, and he's condemned to slavery in a foreign land, right? An exact repeat of his older brother's fate. This time, the brothers have it even better. They can get rid of Benjamin without even lifting a finger, right? All they have to do is let the events take their course, right? Just, sorry, if Benjamin stole the goblet or whatever happened, okay, what can we do? And if that happens, the entire family of Rachel is lost. And finally, their father will accept and recognize the children of Leah as his true children. It seems perfect for them. And what happens? No. This time, the brothers refuse to abandon Benjamin. The same Judah, Yehuda, who led his brothers to the decision to rid themselves of Joseph by selling him into slavery, he puts his own life on the line to make good his promise and to defend his rival, his brother Benjamin, Rachel's other son. In other words, in the 22 years that passed since the selling of Joseph, not only do the brothers regret their crime in selling Joseph, they came to accept the fact that the children of Rachel hold an important part and place within the mission of Israel. And when Joseph saw that, he says, now is the time to reconcile, to reveal myself, and to bring these two factions together once again, to reunite the children of Rachel and the children of Leah. So the reason why he put them through the ringer is not because he wanted to make them suffer. On the contrary, he did it for their own good. He wanted them to reach the ultimate level of teshuvah, of repentance, putting them in the same position they were 22 years earlier, and for them to come out strong and not fall and falter this time. And this will show that they did the ultimate teshuvah. Okay?
Wow.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Now, we'll take it a few steps further. Okay? So let's summarize what we learned so far. Jacob's marriages to Leah and Rachel produced two factions within Israel. The children of Rachel embody spiritual perfection, tzaddik. The children of Leah embody the task of engaging with this material world, perfecting and sanctifying and elevating the material world, the idea of teshuvah. Okay?
Rabbi, is there any significance to the fact that the materialism outnumbers the spiritual?
Yes, yes. We'll soon see that. Perfect. We'll soon see that. And we'll, yeah, it's going to answer a few other questions in the story. Yeah. But we want to discuss now how these two factions, Rachel and Leah, Tzaddik and Baal Tshuva, repeat itself throughout history, right? And at times they clash, and at times they join forces. But there's always a tension between them. There's competition between these two. Let me give you a few examples. So historically, the leadership of Israel passed through one and the other, Joseph and Judah. Right? Who was the first king or the first leader of the tribes? It was Joseph. They all come down and bow down to him in Egypt. Right? At first, the children of Leah vehemently resisted the idea that Joseph can be the king. They can't stand it. Then they come to him, and he reveals himself, and they accept it. They bow down to him. Right? When the children, they take it a step further. When the children begin to form as a people, and they come into the land of Israel, who leads the Jewish people into the land of Israel? Who's the leader?
Joshua.
Joshua, very good. Who is Joshua a descendant of? Joseph. Right? Who is the first king of Israel? Saul. Who's Saul come from? Benjamin. Right? He comes from Joseph, children of Rachel. But then the sovereignty is transferred to the tribe of Judah. Right? The first king is the king David. I mean, the first king after Saul is the king David. Right? Comes from the tribe of Judah. Now, the transfer of leadership from Rachel to Leah, from Joseph, from Saul to David, is not so smooth. King Saul fought it for many years. He didn't accept it at first, right? And 3 generations later, after King David, the tribe of Joseph under Yerovam ben Nevat, I don't know how you say his name in English, Jeroboam maybe, he broke away from the house of David and established a rival king of Israel in the north, right? But much the same way that Judah and his brothers initially rejected Joseph's leadership. And many centuries passed before the undisputed leader of kingship of the Jewish people became permanently under the kingdom of the tribe of Judah. And it's going to be like that till Mashiach comes. But we see that this conflict between Joseph and Judah is shifting back and forth throughout history with kingships. Another example. Now, our purpose, mentioned many times, our purpose in this world is to make a dwelling place for God in this world. And we do that in many different ways. But traditionally, historically, we've had 2 houses of God. 2 different types of houses of God. Of course, we had 2 temples, but before the temple came the Mishkan, the tabernacle, right? The tabernacle was constructed by the children of Israel, where? In the Sinai desert. And it continued to serve as the central house of worship for hundreds of years after they entered the Holy Land. It was mostly in a place called Shiloh. That's why the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was known as the Tabernacle of Shiloh, because that's where it actually traveled, but that's where it sat for most of the time, and thus it's Mishkan Shiloh. After the Mishkan wasn't destroyed, but it was taken apart. Then came the Holy Temple that was built by Solomon, King Solomon, and the Temple Mount, and later was built by Ezra on the same spot when he came back from Babylon, from Babel, right? If you look at the difference between the Mishkan and the Holy Temple, I think I have it on the PowerPoint here. Let me see if we have it here. And we have Tzaddik and Baal Tshuva. Okay, skip all these. I just want to show you the picture. Okay, so we have the kingdom of Joseph, Joshua, Saul, and then comes the house of Judah. Here we go, the Mishkan. Here are the divine dwellings. On the left side, you have the Mishkan, and the right side, you have the Holy Temple. If you look at the Mishkan, you'll notice that the Mishkan was made up of different types of materials. They're generally speaking, we're not going to go into great detail, but generally speaking, if God created the world, there are 4 different types of creations, one higher than the other. The lowest is the inanimate, higher than that is vegetative, higher than that is animal, higher than that is human being. If you look in the tabernacle, you know, you'll find the different elements, right? There's materials. There we go. Sorry. Go back. There, on the left side. I think you may have a picture in your book. Oh, see, there's a picture in your book on page 122. You see that? So the tabernacle was made from a variety of materials, and it was made in the ascending order. If you look in the picture, you'll see the lower part of the Mishkan was, on the bottom, was inanimate materials, right? It was earth and gold. And then on top of that was higher materials. There was wood, right? And there was wood. Higher than the wood, on the top was the covering that was made up of
animal skins.
Animal skin, comes from animals. So we find the Mishkan represents an elevation, right? Whilst the Holy Temple was only made of stone, marble, and gold. It was all of the lowest level of materialism. Why? Because the Mishkan, if you look here on the screen, it's organic materials. It's a Shiloh. It represents Joseph's mission. Joseph is all about a tzaddik, perfection, elevation, going from the bottom up, just elevating oneself. And therefore, whose portion was the Mishkan on? Whose land was the Mishkan on? It was Joseph's land. How about the temple? The Holy Temple? The Holy Temple was made of stone and earth. It was in Jerusalem, which is under the rule of the portion of Judah. Okay? So here too we have in the Mishkan, sorry for that, the Mishkan is represents Joseph, and later on comes the Holy Temple, which is Judah. Okay? I'll take it one step further, and then we'll try to bring things together. Where did Rachel die?
On the road, I forgot.
Bethlehem, near Bethlehem.
Right, on the way to Beis Lechem, on the side of the road, she was buried.
Okay.
Right, and where was Leah buried? Leah's buried right next to Jacob in the Maris of Machpelah, in the cave of Machpelah. You have Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob and Leah. It's very interesting because the wife that he loves, the wife that he was originally wanted to be with, is not the wife he's buried with, and is not the wife that he has most children with. Most of the tribes come from Leah, and he's buried with Leah. But he wants Rachel first. Rachel is his ultimate, right? And Chassidus explains that Rachel is the path. Leah is the goal. Joseph is the path. Judah is the goal, which is the reason why Rachel is buried in the side of the road. She represents the path, but the goal is Judah. That means the model, the ideal is that of Judah, of taking the material world and elevating it. The idea of Leah, of getting down and dirty, and really elevating the coarseness of the world. But before that has to come Joseph. You see throughout history, first came the tabernacle, Joseph, then came the temple in Judah. First came the kingdom of Joseph, then came the kingdom of Judah. First they bowed down to Joseph, then Judah became king. Everything, even Mashiach, Messiah, there'll be two Messiahs, it says. One Messiah, the son of Joseph, the Messiah, the son of Judah. Joseph is the path to get to Judah. How is that? What does that mean? So let's explain that in our own personal lives. In our lives, we each have a Joseph and we have a Judah. And we also experience that tension between these two factions within ourselves. Let's take a look at the Talmud, text 16. which discusses a very interesting concept. An interesting question. Text, yeah, here we go. It was already the case that Rabbi Tarfon and the sages were assembled in the loft of Nitza house in Lod, when the query came before them, which is greater, learning or action? Said Rabbi Tarfon, action is greater. Said Rabbi Akiva, of course, learning is greater. Concluded all, learning is greater because learning brings to action. Right? So there's a question is, what's greater, learning Torah or doing mitzvahs? One said learning, one said doing mitzvahs. And they conclude, well, learning is greater because it brings two mitzvahs. So let me ask you a question. Does the Talmud settle the question or does it make it more complicated? No, it seems like it's just making it more complicated. The Talmud states that learning is greater, but then explains because learning brings to action. But if learning is greater because it brings to action, doesn't it mean that action is greater? So what does it mean learning is greater because it brings to action? Maybe it's just, that the guy comes to Rabbi and says, Rabbi, Simon stole from me $1,000. And the Rabbi says, you're right. And Simon comes, no, I didn't steal. I don't know anything. And the Rabbi says, you're right too. And the Rabbi's wife, the Rebbitzin, says, Rabbi, you can't say they're both right. And the Rabbi says, you're right too. So it's not just about saying, yeah, you're right. What's greater? Is it learning or is it action?
They're both equal. You can't have one without the other. It doesn't make for a fulfilling world if you don't have one. If you just study Torah all day and don't do mitzvahs, you haven't fulfilled the commandments. On the other hand, if you don't have the learning, you don't know what the commandments are and how to fulfill them.
Very good. So let the Talmud say they're both equal. Shalom al Yisrael.
That would be too easy. That would be too easy.
Too easy, right? So on the most basic level, the Talmud is saying that yes, the ultimate goal is action. However, in order for your actions to be effective, like you say, Steve, you first have to learn. That means the only way to get to action is through learning. Now, let's go back to Judah and Joseph, right? Learning is spiritual, that equals spiritual growth. Joseph, the Yosef elements of our life. Action is how we engage with the material world. That's the Judah element. Ultimately, we were sent down into this world to engage the material world and make it a better, holier, spiritual, more godly place than it was before we got here. No question. That's our mission. Our mission is that of Judah. But to achieve this, we have to perfect our inner spiritual world. Without self-improvement, without personal growth, right, driven by our inner Joseph, we can never fulfill our goal of Judah of perfecting the world. We have this, take for example, children. When children grow up, I'll tell you with my children, at the younger age, we try to shelter them. We try to guide them. We put them in school. We don't put them out to work, right? 7-year-old, 8-year-old, 9, we don't put them out to work to make a living. We sort of try to just shelter them and just be in the confines of school and studying. And that's the Joseph. Right? Even though we know ultimately this child is ultimately going to spend most of his life learning and being out in the world and dealing with people, but in order to get that frame of mind and to get that, foundation to be able to deal with the world properly, you got to study. You have to first, like a tree, you got to plant it and take care of it, and then it can go on its own. So first you need the Joseph and the Rachel, and then you come to the Judah, then you come to the Leah. All right? So let's just try this. It's a question of discussion on page 125. Imagine if you were given the job to compose the mission statement of Judaism, let's say in one sentence or 2 sentences or a couple of words. What's the mission statement of Judaism?
To bring the earth closer to heaven.
Very good. Bring heaven closer to earth, bring earth closer to heaven.
It's to fix the world. What's that? Tikkun Olam.
Tikkun Olam. Okay, good. Tikkun Olam would be a good one.
Yeah.
So I think we can split it into 2 general terms. Number 1 is the spiritual, religious objectives. And that would include things like developing a deeper relationship with God, the prayer, Torah learning, mitzvahs, getting rid of our negative character traits, getting rid of anger, laziness, selfishness, greed, and truly, focusing on family life, preserving our traditions and values, holiday rituals, tefillin, Shabbos, etc., etc. That's one element. Another element would be improving the world, fighting for justice, overcoming poverty, illness, war, ignorance, working for world peace, similar universal goals, which what we call tikkun olam today. Right? Sometimes we view these two endeavors as two separate realms. Right? Because you think, how could my putting on tefillin, or my putting on a mezuzah on my door, or my lighting Shabbos candles, how could that contribute to world peace? It's just me, right? But the story of Joseph and his brothers teach us that these two goals are interdependent. Joseph is the path and Judah is the goal. Our goal is to perfect the world, to perfect and elevate the material world. But the only way to get there is by nurturing and developing our internal religious and spiritual lives. To state it simply, you can't fix the world without fixing yourself. It was a very famous story told, I think it was Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev. It tells a story that he grew up very idealistic and very, he wanted to change the world. Every college student today thinks they're going to change the world, right? He wanted to change the world, and he realized after a while he couldn't. It wasn't working. So he decided to change his city. After he realized it wasn't working, he tried to change his family. Said it wasn't working. So he decided to change himself. He worked on himself, and that worked. He changed himself, and then his family changed, and then his city changed, and he had a positive effect on the world. Joseph represents working with ourselves, elevating ourselves, deepening our relationships with God. That comes first. That is a prerequisite. That is what Jacob wanted all along. He said, I want Rachel to marry Rachel. Because he recognized that Rachel has to come first. Rachel is about recognizing there's morals in the world. There are absolute morals in the world. There's idea of connecting with God. But ultimately, Rachel leads to Leah. Joseph leads to Judah. Most of his life he spends with Leah. He's buried with Leah. Most of his children come from Leah. Right? This is the blessing he got from his father in a deceiving way. But since his father gave Jacob the blessings of Esav, Jacob and his children, every one of us, our mission in this world is not just to sit in our rooms and study Torah all day. It's nice, it's important to elevate ourselves, to refine ourselves. But the ultimate purpose is to transform the material world, utilize every gift that God gives us, whether it's our physical bodies or energy, anything that God gives us, utilize it for a positive purpose. And this way we fulfill the mission both of Joseph and of Judah. With that, we'll conclude today's lesson. We got a lot of work to do. We got a lot of world to fix. And let us hope and pray that God gives us the strength and the health and the ability to continue working, studying like we're doing tonight. But studying like we're doing tonight in the manner of Joseph is step number one. Let's take all we've learned and apply it and to truly do mitzvahs. Tomorrow, America celebrates Thanksgiving. And I tell you, Baruch Hashem, I've seen so many mitzvahs are being done, helping other people. Let us take what we've learned tonight and thank Hashem for what we have, pay it forward, and make our part of the world a better place.
Amen.
Wishing you a good night. And, thank you.
Amen. Good night. Good night.
All the best.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yes, you too. Thank you.
Thanks,
Enjoy the turkey.
Good night.
Or the salmon. We'll see you. Good night. Good to see you all again. Thank you.